Well, thank you, Faye and Melinda.
Yes, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's been a pleasure to know both Melinda and Faye. So thanks for being a part of our lives. Do you want to start?
Sure. I'm not kind of too used to this presentation setup, but usually a smaller group. The first picture is an aerial view of our farm. You note the trees surrounding it, and it doesn't give a picture of all of the forest we have around the farm. My ancestry is from Germany, and I have some forest in my soul, and so I had to create a little forest on the farm, and so we planted 60-some different species of trees and shrubs on the farm over the years.
Yeah, the orchard's missing.
Yeah, we can't see the orchard and a lot
picture.
of the shelter belts. And here's where we are in southeastern North Dakota. And here's a satellite view of the land that we farm. We're in the Prairie pothole region of North Dakota, which means we have all these potholes or sloughs, and we have many wetlands on our farm. And a third of the farm is into grass and legume planting, which we had hoped to at some point put some large livestock on. It's still kind of in our brains. These are our main crops, the grain crops. Our rotation is fairly simple at this point. We start with specialty proso millet, after green manure of Sudan grass, to which manure has been applied. And then after the millet, we have triticale and hairy vetch planting, and then buckwheat, and then back to Sudan grass.
And you can see on there what our primary seed crops are. We raise squash, tomatoes, watermelon, sweet corn, flint corn, popcorn, onions, beets, pumpkins. All of those are varieties where David has actually bred and released varieties that are where we introduce these varieties into the seed trade. We currently are at 25 varieties of seed with 2 additional herbs, so 27. So those are our seed crops.
I've been an intensive gardener for about 40 years, and I like saving my own seed, and I got to realize that our own seed that we saved always had greater vigor and was slowly adapting, and so one by one I started saving seeds from different things we raised in our garden, and so
yeah, we'll profile some of those seed varieties a little later.
But it's interesting. We started out as a turkey farm. My dad came to the farm in 1953 and raised turkeys, and I grew up with turkeys and raising turkey hatching eggs, and so next slide. We raised. We started to raise organic turkeys in about the early. We developed an organic turkey production system as a result of our knowledge about turkey raising, and we found this Kent bronze from the Kent family in Texas that we felt was just the perfect bird for organic production system. And it's both a wonderful story and a tragedy, because I think the Kent bronze has been lost to us. So if anybody knows of the Kent bronze being out there, please let us know about it.
Yeah, it was an older couple by the last name of Kent that had a breeding flock that we were able to access eggs from. So the turkey part of the farm was Dan and my operation, and David had the grain operation, and these 2 operations integrated really well into the farm. We were marketing our birds on the East Coast and the West Coast. So we were selling to Bread and Circus and Mrs. Gooch's before they were bought out by Whole Foods, and then subsequently selling to Whole Foods. And so this is a picture of our family that we took for a point of purchase marketing material at the time. And you can see Dan and David's mom and dad in that picture. And the success of our farm really is in large part to the groundwork that they laid. And also the fact that they passed down the land to the next generation without making them pay for it again. So that's a real tribute to our ancestors. Grandpa has passed away. Grandma is still with us. She's 93 years old and still doing quite well.
We intend to keep on the tradition of passing the land down unencumbered. Here's another shot of some turkeys and some guineas.
So we continue to raise our own meat. Chickens, eggs, turkey, pork, beef.
This is a snapshot of the Canadian Crown gray millet that we raise. That's a field view. It's a very competitive millet, very nutritious. Dad got some. This is a variety that came out of Canada. It was released in about 1939, and its production potential has not diminished over that whole time.
So how many years has it been on the farm?
60 years. Saving the same seed. Field of buckwheat. And we've occasionally tried alternative crops. This was borage, which is an interesting crop.
And that's our Dan and my son's Neil, son Neil. You think he was what, 4 years old at that point.
And here's an experiment with some winter spelt that we drilled into some millet stubble. And green manure, sun hemp. I imported a few sun hemp pounds from South Africa, as it turned out. They grew very well in North Dakota, but wouldn't produce seed here. Another one was Niger, the little seeds you can buy in the store you feed to the finches. And things like the Negro Azul potato from Tater Mater Seeds. Tom Wagner is a breeder of potatoes and tomatoes, and he's kind of been doing what we've been doing all these years, only on a much larger basis. And you can see how intensely purple this potato is. We just love it.
So the inset picture is actually mashed potatoes made out of this. So they
Yeah.
don't wash out and lose their color like a lot of
Yeah.
the purple potatoes do. It maintains its color.
Yeah, they're just gorgeous. And we can grow a lot of things in North Dakota, and at one time I was president of the North Dakota Banana Growers Association, and I'm there with my secretary. And we raise a lot of green manures on the farm and have over the years, alfalfa, peas and alfalfa there. Buckwheat we use as a green manure pretty extensively in our vegetable seed production areas.
Also great habitat for bees.
Yes, and let's see, that's
green manure,
buckwheat
and hairy
and
vetch.
hairy vetch, and we use a lot of combinations. That's one with sweet clover and hairy vetch. This one is over the years we've had a lot of serendipitous green manures. This is volunteer oats and red clover. I don't know if you can see the little red clover bloom right there in the middle. We raised red clover one year, a terrific crop, planted oats on it the next spring, got a huge crop of oats, harvested it fairly early. And you guys remember, this is in North Dakota, and after harvest, we had good rainfall, and this picture was taken in early October, and the oats is about 3 feet high and starting to head out. And here's rye and hairy vetch, which we've used a lot of. We use triticale and hairy vetch now. There's our sorghum sedan in September in 2012. And the left side of the picture is how it was about the 1st of October. And I couldn't reach the top of it then. And that's more than 8 feet tall. There's some more of the sedan grass in the summertime.
So that's my husband Dan in that picture. He's 6'3", so that was taken, I believe, in August.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, by the way, that earlier green manure picture, the sedan grass, that was planted on July 20th. And it attained 8 feet or more by the 1st of October when it froze down. There's some Daikon radishes we grew one year, and we continue to use those. This is the fellow that was really the impetus for starting the Farm Breeder Club in the Dakotas. And I read this book, and we got talking about it, had other people read it, and so we formed this farm breeding club to do work on breeding resistance into different crops that we raise. And it developed into, exploring a whole bunch of different stuff.
So we have one of our Farm Breeding Club management team members here in the crowd, Steve Zwinger. Steve, do you want to stand up? Thank you, Steve.
Here's one of the early variety trials that we were screening. This is primarily wheat, I think, doing a screen on different varieties of wheat on our farm. The most interesting thing about, if you're raising one variety of grain, you don't realize what diversity there is even amongst all the wheats. So when you look over the varieties of wheats, or you look over the varieties of oats all growing in one place, you can see each of the varieties have just a little different shade of green. It's really astounding. There's some Farm Breeding Club people doing scoring on a trial, scoring the different grains. I think that was oats right there. Yeah. And there, Steve put me on the combine harvesting the plots. There's the plot combine. You wouldn't believe how much those things cost. And this is a couple of projects that we've worked on our farm. The oats there is actually a multi-line that was put together by the oat breeder at NDSU. It's got about 1,200 of the best varieties of oats from around the world in a single population. And it has performed very well. I'm continuing to plant it and select it. And we'll see what comes out of that, but it has some pretty good promise. And the one on the left is a white sorghum that we're working on from a fellow from Oregon, a breeder from Oregon, an old fellow that has granted us some seed to work with. And that's pretty good for North Dakota, by the way, to get mature sorghum that yields 6,000 pounds an acre.
Traditionally a southern crop.
Yeah. And here's another experiment that my nephew is doing with triticale winter peas. I had the idea that triticale winter peas would make just a great poultry feed. So if you could raise them together, all you got to do is grind them after harvest.
Yep. Here we go. So this is actually a picture of another trial that our son Nick is doing. This is Nick and David teamed up to go through the Germplasm Information Network, the GRIN network, USDA Germplasm Collection, and look up different heirloom wheat varieties. And so they ran a trial, a screening trial of how many different varieties were in there?
It's pretty close. I don't know. I don't remember. My brain ain't so good anymore. I think it's somewhere about 50 or 60.
So you can see the wheat trial in the background, and in the foreground is another project that the NPSAS Farm Breeding Club is working on, where we're doing vegetable variety trials. So that's a trial of 20 different carrots. So we trialed them and then taste tested 20 different carrot varieties. And
this is really was my teacher from the beginning. I read this book. Well, Melinda wanted me to tell this story, so I guess I'll tell this story now. Back in the early 1970s, the only reference for anything about organic agriculture was Rodale Press. And so my parents were getting Prevention magazine, and J.I. Rodale was talking in this health food magazine about farming. And so I hadn't yet made any kind of connection between farming and health. And so, you know, and I was just out of high school. I learned the methods of industrial agriculture, and I thought, gee, this is a weird idea. And so, you know, I started to delve into and read more and more about organic farming. And one winter I was going to just prove to myself once and for all that this was a crock. And instead, in my studies, I had some sort of an epiphany about, hey, this would be a great project for my life, and this is what I should be doing. And so I started with the garden, and I got Ruth Stout's No Work Garden book, and I adapted her methods to the drier, colder plains. And there we are in the garden checking out the marvelous soil quality underneath the mulch. We've had, our gardens had been permanently mulched now for, this will be the 41st year coming up. And I have deepened the topsoil from maybe 8 inches to at least 3 feet of black soil, all with earthworm activity. It's the most amazing thing.
So that little boy there is looking at earthworm castings.
Yeah. So I noticed there was some kids with earthworm poop out there selling earthworm poop, and that's, yeah, produced great quantities of it in the garden, and it's just been, it's a marvelous teacher. It's the soil that's our standard. You know, it's what we work for out in the field, knowing that we probably can never attain that with machine agriculture. This is all handwork in the garden. There's nothing heavier on the garden than our own footfalls.
And the Frank Kutka, who's another member of the Farm Breeding Club, had taken some soil samples from the garden and had it tested. And I don't remember the numbers. Neither one of us could remember the numbers at the time, but the organic matter is basically equal to that of native prairie soil.
Yep, yep. That's,
So welcome to our garden.
And that's the garden before the deer fence, I believe, back in the days. Here we are in the process of mulching the garden. Right in the center are 2 rows that we put new mulch on. And if you see over to the right there, there's a bare strip, and that's one of the modifications to Ruth Stout's that we did, was that we open up the row to the sun every spring so the sun can warm up the soil, heat it up good, and then we tuck it with mulch around the plants. There are young tomato plants planted in there. You probably can't see them, but we tuck them in then in June sometime, and they're ready to go then.
You can see the date, June 18th. So we carry each one of the square bales in and place them on the mulch row and cut the strings, and then take the squares and lay them out, and then spread them out.
Yeah, my brother and I used to pitch all this hay on the back of a pickup, pull it off the pickup and deposit it in front of the garden, and carry it in by hand into the garden and lay it out. Now we just bale hay and bring the bales in. It's much easier for older guys.
So this is when the job's all done.
Yeah, and it looks so nice. I had a neighbor come over one day and she said, "David, this looks just like a catalog."
So the garden's not only our teacher, but it's also our keeper. So it keeps us well fed and supports our health, but it's also trained us in seed breeding and seed saving. When we lost the turkey operation, we had to find another enterprise to support Dan and I's involvement in the farm. And so we began raising seed under contract with other certified organic seed companies. So these are various seed catalog companies. And many of the varieties were actually varieties that David had bred on our farm. And our goal was to develop seed that was well adapted to our region. So we began marketing our own seed under our own label, Prairie Road Organic Seed, 2 years ago. So this is our 3rd season. So these are our seed packets. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some of our signature varieties.
Okay, Uncle David's Dakota Dessert Squash.
We tend to agree.
Well, back in the early 70s, I started intensive gardening, and I got a bunch of maximas together. That's buttercup squash and Hubbard squash and a couple others, and just planted them together and let Mother Nature take its course and see what came out of that. And I started selecting for flavor and sweetness, texture, color, shape, and flesh thickness, and over a period of 30 years, this is what we came up with, and I think we got a real winner. I mean, it's tough as nails. We've never had a crop failure in over 40 years with this squash. It even went through, I mean, it even got hailed out on July 18th one year, just totally smashed into the ground. It came back and produced good fruit.
So one of the first times I went to visit the farm, Dan and I were dating, and he brought me home to the farm. And we had a meal with squash, and everybody at the table had to fill out a card and rate the squash on all of these traits and whether or not we were going to save the seed from the squash that we had just eaten at that meal. And so they would do this all through the winter. So there were pie tin trays laying all over the place, mostly on the radiator heaters, of various squash with the rating tags in them. So at the end of the season, they go through all the tags and figure out which ones were the stock seed to be kept in the mix to grow the next year's seed.
Yep, and we still, every single seed, every single squash that we select seed from is taste tested. It has to pass the taste test.
So we've got it dialed in.
Yeah. We don't do quite the whole scoring card thing anymore.
A little more informal.
Yeah. But that's the traditional way that farmers for 10,000 years, farmers and gardeners, have saved seed. You know, they just let stuff have sex, and then they selected the best out of that. You know, if I took one squash blossom and put pollen on another squash blossom and then selected out of that, you wouldn't have near as much biodiversity as if you let the bees move all of this pollen around. Now, of course, we can do it faster if we do one flower on one flower. You know, it took me 20 years to get a really good squash out of that, to get all the bumps out of that. But I think it's well worth it. And why are we in such a hurry? You know, Mother Nature works slow and sure. And so I wanted to just carry on that same traditional way, real traditional way of doing plant selection. And Sweet Dakota Rose watermelon is another interesting happening. I had two melons, Early Canada, which was an old melon out of Gurney's, if some of you know Gurney's catalog from many years ago, and then a Black Diamond watermelon. And I planted the two in a population and started selecting from that. And one year, I lost all of my watermelons except for one plant. Lost them all to disease. But there was one plant that survived. I had one fruit. And this population comes from that. Okay, so it's narrow genetically, but we've never had any disease in this population in all those years. I mean, this has been 35 years or more.
So that's a nice thick mat of watermelon, and you don't know what's under there until the frost comes along, right? So this is that same field right before we're ready to start harvesting the seed, right? So all the vines have been senesced and actually frosted. We leave our watermelon out until it's gone through a couple of frosts so that it's nice and soft so we can harvest the seed easily. So I love that shot.
Yeah, we cut these open and vacuum the seeds out in the field, and the carcasses are left there, and we have to work with the bees because the bees are all there getting their.
So this is usually during pheasant hunting season, so it makes for interesting when people drive by. We've seen a few near accidents where people are slowing down.
They slow way down, wondering what the heck
what
these
are
people
they doing?
are doing out there. We do the same thing with pumpkins too, so it makes a funny thing. This is Dakota Tears onion that we've been selecting for many years.
This variety was actually trialed by Organic Gardening magazine and was named one of the top 10 new introductions in 2010. So it's gained some notoriety on the national level.
It's claimed to be, not by us, but to those in the know with a wider view, that that's the best OP onion out there.
So this is Dakota Tears onion seed in bloom, which is just beautiful. The bees love this.
And here, this is a special shot, and this is always a special thing happening on our farm every year. I have this winter onion that my great-grandpa Schober brought over from Germany, and it's really tough. I mean, it survives 40 below zero, open winter, nothing can phase it. But what's interesting about this onion, if you look closely, you'll see all the bees on the flowers, and they're covered with just every imaginable pollinator that's out there.
If you want to find out how many pollinators you have,
Yep.
you go look at the Dakota
Yep.
winter
I
onion
mean,
patch.
along with the honeybees, there's all the different varieties of bumblebees and the wild ground nesting bees and syrphid flies and butterflies, just everything feasts on these onions. And so it's just amazing to stand out there and watch them. And here's, we raised a corn. We actually helped develop this corn that Alan Capular started from California. He's, Martian Jewels is the name. And it's a beautiful corn. The stalks are purple. It's really striking from a distance. The whole plant is purple. And the cobs are purple, but it's got white kernels. And when it's a sweet corn, and when you eat this thing, you're drooling purple all over.
Oh yeah, moms will love this.
Oh yes, a great kid's corn. A great kid's corn, yes.
Very fun.
And this is the Dakota Black Popcorn. This is originally from Jung's. I was looking for a popcorn that would mature in North Dakota. And I found this black popcorn that did pretty good, but I also kept experimenting with white popcorns and yellow popcorns, and so I kind of got a mixed population there again. But this is a really special corn because in 2004, we had it pollinating at the same, it was going to pollinate at the same time a sweet corn was pollinating. And so we had to cut the tassels off the popcorn, thinking, okay, that's the end of the crop. But the popcorn silks kept growing out longer and longer and longer. Some of them were hanging 12 inches, 14 inches out at the end of the cob, waiting to be pollinated. In the meantime, the plant was growing its tassels back. And it pollinated and set out a full crop. Again, we pollinated it just a few days before Ginger and I, we detasseled it just a few days before Ginger and I were married on July 24th, and it made a full crop after that. Amazing. So there's a lot of power in some of these plants. Another very spiritual plant that we raise is Wasichu flint corn. This was a native corn. It's got no yellow in it. An anthropologist told me it probably was raised in our area at least back as far as the 1500s by the Native Americans in the Jim River Valley area.
Okay, we gotta speed up.
And this is Crimson Sprinter tomato. I was always on the search for the best tasting tomato in the world. And this was the best tasting tomato in the world. And there's another one that tastes a little bit better, but we'll talk about that later. But this, I got the last seed that a Seed Savers member had of this tomato, and I started planting it in the garden. I thought, wow, this has got just the perfect sweet and tart together. And then
It also has the crimson gene.
it has the crimson gene, which means it's got a high lycopene in it and good for men. And it also had some septoria resistance. And so we set up this disease nursery in our garden. Actually, our garden is the disease nursery itself. I mean, we're cloistered in this trees. We have not too good air circulation in there. And if we have a lot of rainfall, I mean, it's just a disease nursery. And so it's a good place to test stuff and to do selection work. And we found that, yeah, we got a little more resistance on Crimson Sprinter, and we had other tomatoes growing beside it.
Yeah, we trialed some tomatoes and we gave them the acid test. We planted them in the garden, and it really was an eye-opener because none of these tomatoes did very well. And it really reaffirmed for us that we were having success in selecting for disease resistance. Right. So Crimson Sprinter gifted us back for all the work that David put into it.
The serendipity has been my really best friend over the years. And this was the key thing that I told Melinda about, is observe and see and think about it. And I found this different tomato, just slightly different, on a Crimson Sprinter plant. Indeed, it was a sport. And so that's the name Dakota Sport we gave it. And look at that skin. I think that's my brother's reflection in the skin.
Right, you can see the photographer's reflection in the skin. Dan's holding the tomato. This is taken out in the field, an unwashed tomato, and that skin is so super shiny, glossy, and ultra thin. It wouldn't be a really great market tomato, but it's a wonderful garden tomato.
Absolutely.
You hardly notice the skin when you eat it.
The taste is just superb. We have served this to numerous people, and they have all voted it the best tasting tomato that they've ever tried.
Here's our tomato testing. We're taste testing tomatoes on a field day.
And this is a shot of red cow lung sorghum, which Frank Kutka, who is another Farm Breeder Club guy, along with Frank and Steve and Theresa, are kind of like the triumvirate of the Farm Breeder Club. and Frank asked me one day if I raised sorghum, and I said no, and he said, "You will," and so we are. And this turned out to be a special sorghum because it fit just perfectly as a living trellis for pole beans. It's got narrow leaves, it's got long internodes, and the stem isn't so big around that the bean will readily twine around it.
So there you see
the picture.
Dry beans. They're senescing at that point, but you can see them climbing up the sorghum. So for us, it's a real work saver because we don't have to actually put up a fence for these pole beans to go up, and we don't have to take it down in the fall, and the birds love it.
Right, and you can plant the sorghum and the beans at the same time. And
yep, one on one.
Yeah.
One bean seed, one sorghum.
Yep. And here's our here's the classic Howden pumpkin. What we've shortened up the growing season for it a little bit by raising it in North Dakota and selecting it for that. We've have some ripen up as early as August. On
August
occasion.
8th, we had ripe pumpkins.
Yeah. And here's our stock seed selection. And you know, it's always a struggle going out in the field. Okay, what pumpkin should I choose? So we always choose a lot more pumpkins than what we really need, but we want, of course, a good population.
So this is the stock seed selection. So
Yeah.
we go through the plot and pick out the best specimens of pumpkins. If we're doing pumpkins, watermelon, if we're doing watermelon, select them, put them aside, and those are the ones that we harvest for a stock
Right.
seed. So that's the seed for the seed. So that's the seed that we plant the next year. So we're constantly doing
Right.
this selection work.
Yep. And so we were all out there one day, and it soon became apparent that everybody had just a little different favorite. Some like deeper ribs, some like the darker color, some like the different kind of handle, some like the tall flat ones, some like the short round ones. And so we decided, well, we'll put them all in the population and keep all those types going.
Yep, so we make sure we have a diversity of shapes and sizes
Yep.
in our pumpkins.
Yep.
So this is Sweet Dakota Bliss. It's a beet that we just released this year. We named it Sweet Dakota Bliss because it's a very sweet table beet. We think it's the best that's out there. And then over on the other side is a shot of Genovese basil flowering. Bees love that as well. They love the basil.
So, to grace your table with abundance, beauty, and grace.
Eat well, dear friends.
Got one more story.
Well,
one
actually,
more.
two more stories. David's got a story to add.
Two more stories, yeah. On the right is my nephew, Nick and Aaron, doing some weeding in wheat trials one year. Well, maybe they were taking measurements
Yeah,
too, I don't know.
they were taking measurements.
And then on the other picture is my nephew Neil and Teresa's nephew Jason, and they're both out operating the equipment that I love best, and that's the hoe. And Neil has his great-grandmother Podoll's hoe, which is now 100 years old at least, and the blade is well worn down. You can tell it's an old hoe, and yeah.
So now that we've told you this wonderful story of building biodiversity and resilience in agriculture, I have to share with you a threat, because what we're facing right now in agriculture with the advent of Roundup-resistant weeds, Dow AgroSciences and Monsanto are now proposing 2,4-D and dicamba-ready crops. And what these crops will do is they will tank mix glyphosate and 2,4-D, or glyphosate and dicamba, and apply that to the corn and soybean crops. And at the very beginning, we showed you a slide of our 480 acres, just part of one section of land. We're surrounded by GMO soy and corn. And so what wakes me up at 3 o'clock at night and keeps me awake for the rest of the night is thinking about the viability of our farm if those crops are approved and released. And I can tell you, we've seen enough herbicide damage on our farm to know that there is no way that our farm will be viable. Not the crops that we raise. We raise highly sensitive crops to these two chemicals. They are not 2,4-D and dicamba ready. And to be honest, neither are we. We don't know if we actually want to live out there. On the conversation on the road, on the way down, we have 7.5 hours in the car. And we were asking ourselves the question, if these crops are released, do we want to live out there? And part of my comment about the tank mixing is that scientists are telling us that you tank mix glyphosate and 2,4-D, and it's way more destructive than either glyphosate or 2,4-D by themselves. So if that stuff moves and you get hit with drift, there's no recovery from that. There's issues for certification, issues for plant resilience. Even if you get hit with a slight amount of drift, there's documentation that a slight amount of drift will result in plant diseases. So maybe the drift won't kill the plant, but it'll cripple it enough that plant disease will take a hold and take it out. And so even though we've built this wonderfully diverse, wonderfully resilient system that is based on stewarding the ecology of the land and the life that is under our care, there is no way that we can protect our farm and our crops from the introduction of these two crops. So there are petitions being circulated throughout this conference. There's one at the Moses booth. There's one at our booth, Prairie Road Organic Seed, C9. We implore you to please sign those petitions. But when you sign those petitions, don't think your job is done. Because what I'm asking you to do is, by signing that petition, you are pledging that you will take an active role and be an active citizen, as Melinda had stated earlier, and make those phone calls to our decision makers. Write in comments to USDA. Right now there's an open comment period for coexistence of GMO and organic agriculture and non-GMO agriculture. So there's a comment period that closes March 4th, so we've got a very short window. And then the other comment period that is open is on the USDA Environmental Impact Study on 2,4-D ready crops, proposed by Dow AgriScience. The next step for the 2,4-D ready crops is a draft environmental impact study from the EPA. So the USDA only had to look at whether or not the seed itself posed a plant or disease pest problem. So that's the only thing they've tasked themselves with. You look at the mission of USDA, it's absolutely absurd that that's the only thing they have to look at in terms of whether or not they should deregulate these crops. So now the EPA will be the next step. They'll come out with their draft environmental impact study, and there'll be a comment period for that. And all of you who remember the advent of the National Organic Program, how many of you wrote in comments to that? So you're familiar with this process. If you have never written in comments, please plug into the organizations that will help you make comments to the USDA. And if you have GMO crops anywhere near you, I guarantee you, this will reach out and touch you. It will devastate you. Organic crops and 2,4-D and dicamba-ready crops cannot coexist. Coexistence is a complete lie. And Melinda and I are doing a session tomorrow at 1:30, right after lunch. It's over in the Radisson Room Y, I believe is the number. And if you want to hear more about it, we'll talk about the rhetoric around GMOs and also the impact on agriculture. So I hate to close on a note of throwing cold water on all of you, but it doesn't matter if you're raising seed crops, gardening, raising a vineyard, have trees that you care about surrounding your farmstead. Basically, what was the word you used? We will have a burnt earth policy.
It's a scorched earth
policy. This is what USDA is proposing. So if you are not 2,4-D and dicamba ready, you yourself personally, and if the crops and the farms that are under your care are not 2,4-D and dicamba ready, you need to raise your voice and speak out. We've got very little time. The USDA at the biotech industry meeting, stakeholders meeting they held in January, said that they will clear the pipeline of any GMO crops that have been petitioned for release by the end of 2014. So they will approve these crops by the end of 2014. That means they will be in the field in 2015. I can tell you more horror stories and more information about what's going on around those issues. Please, if you're interested, come and attend Melinda and my session. But yes, this keeps me awake at night.
But remember, like Melinda said, the hope is in this room.
The hope is in this room. So align yourself with groups like the Pesticide Action Network, the Center for Food Safety. Moses has an action page on this. Pay attention. Pay attention. Use every possible opportunity that you have to raise your objection to this. Call your state ag departments, your representatives, any leader you can think of that should be doing something about this. So thank you.